The dust of the Maddox Ranch was a fine biblical powder, a testament to a punishing sun and a sky that had forgotten how to weep. It settled on the porch rails, on the brim of Sterling Maddox's hat, and on the cracked, worn leather of the suitcase his mother was dragging down the long, unforgiving driveway. He stood on that porch, a man carved from the very pride and granite of the surrounding hills, and watched her go. His jaw was a hard line of resolve, a dam holding back a flood of doubt he refused to acknowledge. Beside him, a whisper, fragrant with perfume and poison. "You're doing the right thing, my love," Clementine murmured, her fingers tracing the tense muscle in his forearm. "It's for the best, for us, for the ranch." Sterling didn't answer. He just watched. Magnolia Voss, a woman who had seemed as permanent as the ancient oaks shading the west pasture, was now a stooped figure, her back to him, shrinking with every step. The suitcase, a pathetic brown rectangle that had sat atop her wardrobe for as long he could remember, bumped and scraped against the gravel. It looked impossibly heavy for her frail arms. It was the emblem of her defeat, of the quiet poverty she had hidden behind a matriarch's stoicism. This was a necessary cruelty, a culling of the herd. The ranch was bleeding money, and his mother's sentimental attachment to old ways and old hands was a luxury they could no longer afford. Clementine had made him see that. She had a mind for sharp edges, for clean cuts, for the brutal arithmetic of survival. "She'll be fine," Clementine added, her voice a silken balm on a wound he hadn't yet admitted he felt. "Her sister in Silver Creek will take her in. It's better this way. Less for her to worry about." He wanted to believe it. He had rehearsed the logic until it had the smooth, worn feel of a river stone in his mind. The ranch was his now, his responsibility. He was the patriarch. His decisions had to be unsentimental, but the sight of his mother, not once looking back, sent a cold splinter of something ugly and sharp through his manufactured certainty. He had expected tears, pleading, a dramatic scene to be endured. He had not expected this quiet, resolute departure. It felt less like a banishment and more like a verdict. The worn suitcase she pulled seemed to swallow the morning light, a void of tired leather and tarnished brass that held 70 years of a life he was casting out. He watched until her small form was just a dark speck against the shimmering heat haze, and the only sound was the rhythmic squeak of the porch swing and the soft, satisfied exhalations of his beautiful wife. The air, once thick with tension, now felt unnervingly hollow, as if the very soul of the ranch had been packed into that shabby case and dragged away down the dusty road. He had won. The cold satisfaction in his chest felt brittle, thin as ice on a winter puddle, and he was terrified to put any weight on it. The hours that followed were strange and dislocated. Clementine moved through the house with a conqueror's energy, her voice bright and melodic as she discussed paint colors for the living room and the possibility of turning Magnolia's old bedroom into a home gym. "We can finally make this place ours, Sterling. Truly ours." He nodded, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He walked the fence lines, the familiar creak of his saddle leather, and the steady rhythm of his horse's gait, usually a comfort. Today, they felt like an accusation. Every weathered post his father and grandfather had set seemed to stare at him. The land itself, the red dirt and stubborn scrub, felt alien, as if it knew he was an imposter. He was the owner, the man in charge, yet he felt a profound and unsettling sense of trespassing. He pushed the feeling down, labeling it guilt, a temporary side effect of a necessary decision. It would pass. It had to. By late afternoon, the oppressive heat had baked the last of his resolve into a kind of numb exhaustion. He was sitting in his father's worn armchair, the leather cool against his sweat-dampened shirt, when he heard the sound. A low rumble, growing steadily closer. It wasn't one of the ranch trucks. This was a different engine, heavier, more deliberate. Clementine paused in the hallway, a look of annoyance crossing her perfect features. "Are you expecting someone?" "No," Sterling said, his gut tightening for a reason he couldn't name. A moment later, a mud-splattered Ford sedan, a decade old but meticulously maintained, rolled to a stop in the space his mother's car had occupied just that morning. The driver's door opened and out stepped Boone Carter, the family lawyer. Boone was a man who seemed to have been born in a starched shirt and a state of perpetual gravity. He moved without wasted motion, his face a mask of professional neutrality that had delivered news of births, deaths, and land acquisitions with the same dry tone. He carried a worn briefcase, a far more handsome cousin to the suitcase Magnolia had dragged away. "Sterling," Boone said, his voice as parched as the yard. He nodded at Clementine, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Mrs. Maddox." "Boone," Sterling replied, standing. "This is a surprise." "I'm afraid my visits usually are," the lawyer said, stepping onto the porch. "May I come in? This won't take long." Clementine's smile was a masterpiece of strained hospitality. "Of course, Boone. Can I get you some iced tea?" "No, thank you. This is business." The three of them stood in the living room, the air thick with the scent of lemon polish and unspoken questions. Boone Carter didn't sit. He placed his briefcase on the heavy oak coffee table and clicked the latches open. The sound echoed in the silent room. He withdrew a sheaf of papers held together by a thick rubber band. "Sterling," he began, his eyes fixed on him with an unnerving intensity. "I am here today in my capacity as legal counsel for the primary owner of the Maddox Ranch property and associated assets." Sterling blinked. "Well, that's me. What's this about?" Boone's expression didn't change. "That is a common misconception, one I have been instructed to correct." He slid the top document from the stack and laid it on the table. It was a deed. The crisp, formal lettering was stark against the dark wood. "The Maddox Ranch has been the sole property of your mother, Magnolia Voss Maddox, since your father's death. He left it to her, and to her alone, in his will. You were granted operational oversight, a managerial position, nothing more." Sterling felt the floor tilt beneath him. He stared at the paper, his own name nowhere to be found in the dense legal script. What are you talking about? This is my birthright. My father." "Your father trusted your mother's judgment implicitly," Boone said, his voice flat, cutting through Sterling's confusion. "He knew she would be the better steward of the legacy." Clementine let out a small, sharp laugh. "That's absurd. Boone, maybe the heat's gotten to you. Sterling has run this ranch for 10 years. "He has," Boone agreed, his gaze still locked on Sterling. "And for the last 6 of those years, he has run it into the ground. Which brings me to my next point." He laid another document on the table. It was thicker, angrier looking. At the top, in bold red letters, were the words, "Notice of Foreclosure." The air left Sterling's lungs in a painful rush. Foreclosure. The word was a profanity, an impossible concept. "No, we're behind, but we have assets. We have credit." "You have neither," Boone stated, his voice devoid of any pity. "The ranch has been leveraged to its absolute limit. The bank has been patient, incredibly patient as it turns out." He then produced a third document, a ledger. He opened it. The pages were filled with neat, precise columns of figures. "This is a record of mortgage payments made to the bank for the past 3 years. As you can see, the ranch accounts you control have been delinquent for 34 of the last 36 months. Sterling stared at the ledger, his mind a roaring chaos. "Then how are we still here?" "Because your mother has been paying the mortgage," Boone said quietly. He tapped a column on the right side of the page. "From her personal savings. Every month, a wire transfer from a bank in Silver Creek. She kept the wolves from the door while you were busy selling off stock at a loss and borrowing against land you didn't own." The room began to spin. Every certainty he had built his life on was turning to sand and slipping through his fingers. His mother, the frail, sentimental woman he had banished for being a financial liability, had been secretly keeping him afloat. The arrogance he had worn like armor that morning shattered, leaving him naked and shivering in the sudden cold wind of the truth. Her Personal savings? Clementine stammered, her voice losing its silken quality, becoming sharp and brittle. What personal savings? She had nothing. Boone Carter finally looked at her, and for the first time, Sterling saw a flicker of undisguised contempt in the lawyer's eyes. You assume much, Mrs. Maddox. Magnolia Voss is a woman of considerable and very private means. He turned back to Sterling, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. She instructed the bank to cease accepting her payments as of last week. She knew this notice was coming. She wanted it to come. She wanted you to see the consequences of your actions, without her as a safety net. Sterling sank into the armchair, his legs no longer able to support him. He looked at the foreclosure notice, the deed, the ledger. They were not just papers. They were the cornerstones of a reality he had been too blind to see. His authority, his pride, his very identity as the master of the Maddox Ranch. All of it was an illusion, a lie he had told himself so convincingly that he had believed it. He had stood on that porch, a king in his own mind, and cast out the very queen who held the kingdom in her hand. "Where is she?" Sterling whispered, his voice hoarse. "She left me instructions not to disclose her location," Boone said, beginning to pack his briefcase. "However, she did leave you this." He pulled out a simple, sealed envelope with Sterling's name written on it in his mother's elegant, familiar script. He placed it on the table amidst the wreckage of Sterling's life. "What is this?" Clementine demanded, her voice shrill. "More games? What does the old woman want?" Boone Carter snapped his briefcase shut. The sound was as final as a gavel strike. "My work here is done. I was instructed to deliver the documents and the letter. The rest," he said, looking directly at Sterling with a heavy, meaningful gaze, "is up to you. You have 90 days until the bank seizes the property. Good day." He turned and walked out, leaving a silence in the room so profound it felt like a physical weight. Clementine snatched the letter from the table, her manicured nails tearing at the seal. Sterling didn't have the strength to stop her. He could only stare at the foreclosure notice, the words blurring through a haze of panic and shame. His wife ripped the letter open and read it, her face a storm of confusion, then fury. "What is this nonsense?" she shrieked, throwing the single sheet of paper at him. "She writes you a poem? A riddle?" Sterling picked it up. His hands were shaking. It wasn't a poem. It was just a few lines. "Sterling, the heaviest burdens are not carried in the hands, but in the heart. True wealth is not what you own, but what you would sacrifice to protect. When you understand the difference, you will know where to find me." His eyes flickered from the letter to the long, empty driveway, remembering the image of his mother struggling with that worn leather suitcase. A burden carried in the hands. He had thought it was a symbol of her poverty, her weakness. A cold, horrifying suspicion began to dawn in the deepest recess of his mind. The case had been heavy, not just with clothes, but with something else, something far more valuable, and in his pride and his blindness, he had let her walk away with it. He was not just a fool. He was a pauper who had just banished the source of a secret fortune, a son who had failed a test he never even knew he was taking. The panic was no longer a slow burn. It was a wildfire consuming him from the inside out. He had to find her. He had to know the truth. The night was a black, starless shroud as Sterling's truck devoured the miles of asphalt between the ranch and Silver Creek. The headlights cut a frantic, desperate tunnel through the darkness, and the engine's roar was a pale imitation of the chaos storming inside his head. He drove with a reckless speed born of pure panic, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every landmark, a twisted juniper, a rusted-out husk of a car, a familiar bend in the road, felt like a milestone on a journey into his own personal hell. Clementine's venomous words echoed in his ears. After Boone Carter had left, her mask of supportive comfort had melted away, revealing a terrifying core of avarice and fear. She hadn't comforted him. She had railed at him, her voice a scalpel dissecting his failures. "How could you let this happen? How could you be so stupid? That old woman played you for a fool and you just let her. All this time she had money? And you threw her out? Her concern wasn't for his shattered pride or their impending ruin. It was for the money that had slipped through their fingers. The ugliness of it had been another shock, another layer of his life revealed as a cheap facade. He had left her there, pacing the house like a caged predator, and fled into the night. He had no address, only a name: Uncle Thomas, his mother's brother, a man who was more myth than memory to Sterling. Thomas Maddox had been the black sheep, the one who'd had a falling out with Sterling's father decades ago over something to do with the worthless northern tracts of their land. He'd left and never come back, spoken of only in hushed, dismissive tones. If his mother was in Silver Creek, she would be with him. Silver Creek was a town clinging to the slopes of the Granite Mountains, a place that had seen its own cycles of boom and bust. As Sterling rolled into the sleepy main street, the glow of a single 24-hour gas station provided the only welcome. He pulled up to the pumps, his mind racing. He couldn't just start knocking on doors. He needed information. Inside, an old man with a face like a wrinkled road map was wiping down a coffee machine. "Excuse me," Sterling said, his voice raspy. "I'm looking for a man named Thomas Maddox. Do you know him?" The old man squinted at him, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Might, who's asking?" "I'm a relative, Sterling Maddox, his nephew." The old man's eyebrows shot up. He put down his rag. "Well, I'll be. A Maddox from the valley. Haven't seen one of you up here in 30 years. He leaned forward conspiratorially. "Folks around here just know him as Tom. Quiet fella. Kept to himself for years, living up on the old Aspen Run. Place was falling apart. Then, about a year ago, something changed. Started fixing it up. New roof, new porch, paying cash for the best lumber. Folks figured he hit a lucky streak." The old man, who introduced himself as Pete Hutchkins, gave him directions, his words planting more seeds of dread in Sterling's gut. Paying cash for the best lumber. The road to the Aspen Run was a winding dirt track that climbed steeply into the pines. Sterling's truck bucked and groaned over the ruts. Finally, through the trees, he saw a light. He cut the engine and the headlights, plunging himself into an unnerving silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the frantic pounding of his own heart. He crept forward on foot, the pine needles soft under his boots. He saw the house then, and it stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't the dilapidated shack Pete had described from memory. It was a handsome, sturdy home, timbers dark and solid, a wide porch with geraniums spilling from window boxes, their red blossoms vibrant even in the faint moonlight. A warm, golden light spilled from a large picture window. This was not the home of a destitute man harboring his penniless sister. This was a place of substance, of prosperity. Drawn by an irresistible, terrible curiosity, Sterling crept through the shadows of the yard until he was crouched beneath the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. The curtains were partially open, affording him a clear view of the scene within, and what he saw dismantled the last remaining pillar of his reality. His mother, Magnolia, was sitting at a large wooden table. She wasn't the frail, defeated woman from the driveway. She looked powerful. Her posture was straight, her face animated and clear, a glass of red wine in her hand. Across from her sat a man with a shock of gray hair and the same strong Maddox jawline as his father. Uncle Thomas. He looked rugged and capable, not like a hermit, but like a man at peace with his station. And between them, on the table, lay the worn leather suitcase. It was open. Sterling's breath hitched in his throat. He could see inside it. It wasn't filled with threadbare clothes and sentimental trinkets. It was packed, neatly and precisely, with thick paper-banded stacks of $100 bills. More money than he had ever seen in one place. And next to the cash were legal documents, deeds, and what looked like geological survey maps. His mother's voice, clear and strong, drifted through the slightly open window. "He took the bait, Thomas. Boone called an hour ago. He said Sterling was shattered." "Good," Thomas said, his voice a low rumble. He needed to be. Pride's a disease. Sometimes you have to burn it out of a man before it kills him. It's not just pride, Magnolia said, swirling her wine. It's Clementine, she's the rot. She flattered his pride, fed his ego, and blinded him to everything that mattered. He couldn't see the ranch was failing because she kept telling him he was a king. Sterling felt a wave of nausea. They were talking about him, about his life, and they were talking about it as if it were a carefully constructed experiment. So the foreclosure notice did its job, Thomas said, tapping one of the survey maps. Now for the real test. Did Boone give him the letter? He did, Magnolia confirmed. And what about the rest? Thomas gestured to the suitcase. Does he have any idea about this? Magnolia laughed, a sound so full of strength and irony it was like a physical blow to Sterling. He thinks this old case is full of my moth-eaten shawls. He stood on that porch this morning, looking down his nose at me, thinking he was casting me out into poverty. He has no idea he was banishing the entire treasury. She paused, her expression turning somber. That suitcase holds the original deed to the Silver Queen mine, the assay reports from the last core samples, and $1.4 million in cash reserves. Sterling's mind reeled. The Silver Queen, a defunct silver mine on the worthless northern tract of the land, a place his father had always called a folly. It wasn't worthless, it was the source of all this. A secret fortune his mother had controlled all along. 1.4 million, Thomas mused, shaking his head. And he let you walk away with it. He's his father's son in all the wrong ways. Stubborn, blind. He has my heart, though, Magnolia said softly, and the unexpected tenderness in her voice was more painful than any condemnation. That's why we have to do this. This isn't about punishment, Thomas. It's about salvation. His and the ranch's. The land knows when its caretaker is unworthy. It's been rejecting him. We're just formalizing the process. Salvation. Rejection. He wasn't a man making decisions. He was a subject in a trial. His expulsion of his mother hadn't been his move at all. It had been the first move of a game she was playing, a game designed to strip him of everything he thought he was, to see what, if anything, was left underneath. So what's the final play? Thomas asked, leaning forward. Magnolia took a deep breath. Her face was illuminated by the lamp, and Sterling saw the immense weight of her decision, the love warring with the strategic necessity. He now knows he has nothing. The ranch is gone. The money he thought he had is an illusion. He has only one thing left to him, his choice of companionship. He will come back to the ranch, and he will confront Clementine. He has to. And he will have a choice to offer her. A choice I will give him when he finds his way here. What choice? He can have the woman who whispered poison in his ear, or he can have a chance to earn back his family's legacy. He cannot have both. He must see her for what she is, without the promise of land or money to blind him. He must cast out the real poison from his life, not by my command, but by his own choice. If he chooses her, then they deserve each other, and the Maddox legacy ends with me. But if he chooses his blood, if he chooses honor, then his real work can begin. Sterling pushed himself away from the window, stumbling backward into the darkness. He felt dizzy, weightless, as if the entire world had been a stage set and the backdrop had just been ripped away to reveal the cold, indifferent machinery behind it. Dawning horror gave way to a desperate, clawing shame. His whole life, his authority, his marriage, had been a test. A long, elaborate, and devastating test. And he was failing. He wasn't just a fool manipulated by his wife. He was a pawn in his mother's grand, painful strategy for his redemption. He stumbled back to his truck. The image of the open suitcase burned into his mind. A vessel not of poverty, but of immense, secret power. A power he had cast away with a contemptuous wave of his hand. The ride back to the ranch would not be one of frantic panic. It would be a slow, somber pilgrimage toward a confrontation that would define the rest of his life. He had to face the poison. He had to make the choice. The drive back from Silver Creek was a descent into a cold, clear hell. The frantic panic had burned itself out, leaving behind the heavy, dense ash of understanding. Sterling drove slowly, the darkness outside the truck no longer a threat but a reflection of the hollow space that had opened inside him. The world he had known was gone, incinerated by the truth he'd overheard through that window. His mother wasn't a victim. She was a grandmaster, and he was a pawn just now realizing the nature of the board. His wife wasn't a partner. She was a parasite he had mistaken for a pillar. And he, Sterling Maddox, master of the ranch, was nothing but a fool in the final act of a play about his own character. He didn't rehearse what he would say. There were no words for this. There was only the stark, brutal choice his mother had laid out for him, a choice that was now his and his alone to wield. He was no longer arriving as a man whose world had collapsed. He was arriving as a man who had finally been shown the architecture of his own cage. The lights of the ranch house were blazing when he pulled into the drive, a beacon of waste and anxiety in the vast, sleeping dark. He killed the engine and sat for a long moment, the silence rushing in. He looked at the house, his house, which was not his house, and felt a profound and aching sense of loss, not for the land or the title, but for the years he had spent in proud, arrogant blindness. He got out of the truck, his boots crunching on the same gravel his mother's suitcase had scraped over that morning. It felt like a lifetime ago. He walked onto the porch and through the front door without a sound. Clementine was in the living room, a whirlwind of nervous energy. She had been drinking. A half-empty bottle of bourbon sat on the coffee table next to a scattering of brochures for luxury apartments in the city. She was on the phone, her voice sharp and low. "I don't care what he said, just find out if there's a loophole. A mine? Is it possible? There has to be something we can—" She saw him standing in the doorway and froze, her eyes wide. She ended the call without a goodbye. "Sterling, you're back," she said, her voice attempting a softness that it could no longer achieve. It was thin, frayed. "Did you find her? What did she say? Is she going to help us?" He walked into the center of the room, feeling the weight of his mother's test, of his father's legacy, of his own catastrophic foolishness. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time without the filter of her flattery. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the avarice twitching at the corners of her beautiful mouth. He saw the rot. "I found her," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of the emotion she expected. It was a flat, dead thing. Her face lit up with a rapacious hope. "And? What's the deal? Will she sign the ranch back to you? Did you tell her about the foreclosure? We need to move fast, Sterling. That lawyer—" "The ranch is gone, Clementine," he said, cutting her off. "There is no deal for the ranch. It's forfeit. The bank will take it in less than 90 days. The hope on her face curdled into fury. "What? You just gave up? After everything I told you? After everything we've worked for? You pathetic—" "But," he interrupted, holding her furious gaze, "my mother has made me an offer. A different kind of offer." He had her attention. She was suddenly still, a predator sensing a shift in the wind. "What offer?" He took a breath, feeling the crushing weight of the moment. This was it, the precipice, the final, terrible choice. He was now the messenger of his own trial. "She said that I have to choose. There are two paths for me, only two." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Path one," he said, his voice steady, "is you." Clementine blinked, confused. "Me? What does that mean?" "It means I can choose to stay with you. To build a life with you, wherever that may be, with whatever we have left. Which is nothing. We walk away from here with our clothes and our debts. That's it. That's the first choice." Her beautiful face twisted into a mask of contemptuous disbelief. "That's it? That's her offer? That you get to be a broke failure with me? What kind of sadistic game is she playing?" "And path two," Sterling continued, his voice dropping lower, "is a chance. Not a guarantee, but a chance to earn back my family's legacy, to work for it, to prove I'm worthy of it. But that path has a condition. What condition? She hissed, her eyes narrowing. He looked straight at her, and in his own reflection in her eyes he saw the weak, manipulated man he had been. It was time to kill that man forever. The condition, Sterling said, each word a stone dropping into a deep well, is that I walk that path alone. The condition is you, Clementine. I have to choose the legacy, or I have to choose you. My mother was very clear. I cannot have both. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Utter, complete silence. And in that silence, Clementine's mask did not just slip, it was obliterated. The face of the supportive, loving wife dissolved, and what was left was something terrifying in its purity. It was the face of pure, naked greed. Her eyes, which had so often looked at him with feigned adoration, now blazed with a cold, transactional fury. "You're telling me," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl, "that the crazy old bitch has a fortune hidden away somewhere. The mine, it has to be the mine. And she's making you choose between that fortune and me." He didn't answer. He just stood there, letting her words hang in the air, a final, damning indictment. She threw her head back and laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. It was a harsh, ugly bark of incredulity. "Is this a joke? You really came back here to ask me that? To present that as a real choice?" She stepped toward him, her finger jabbing at his chest. "You go back there. You go back to that witch and you tell her the games are over. You are her son. That money, that land, that legacy, it's yours. It's ours. You take it. You do whatever you have to do. You say whatever she wants to hear, and you take it. It's not a game, Clementine. It's the only choice I have." "Then you are a bigger fool than I ever imagined," she shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. "You think I hitched my wagon to you, that I endured your senile mother and this dusty hellhole of a ranch to end up with nothing? You think I love you for your sparkling personality, Sterling? I loved your name. I loved the land. I loved the future you promised me, a future with money." The poison was out. It was no longer whispered but screamed. It filled the room, thick and suffocating. And in that moment of terrible, searing clarity, Sterling saw it all. He saw the flattery for the tool it was, the love for the performance it had always been. He saw the cold, hard rot at the center of his marriage and at the center of his own foolish heart for ever believing it was real. He had banished his mother, the source of his salvation, to please this viper. The shame was a physical thing, a fire in his gut. He felt a strange calm settle over him, the calm of a man who has already lost everything and has nothing left to fear. "I see," he said softly. "Good," she snapped. "So go back there and fix it. Tell her you choose the legacy. Lie to her." "Oh, I'm going to choose the legacy," Sterling said, his voice gaining a strength he didn't know he possessed. "But I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell her the truth." He looked at her, at the beautiful, venomous stranger he had married. "My mother asked me to cast out the poison in my life. I thought she meant her. I was wrong." He took a step back, creating a space between them that felt as wide as a canyon. "Pack your things, Clementine," he said, his voice ringing with a final, unbreakable authority he had never truly had before. "I want you out of this house. Tonight." Her face went slack with shock, then contorted with a final, desperate fury. "You can't do that! You can't throw me out! This is my home!" "No," Sterling said, turning his back on her and walking toward the door. "It was never your home. You were just a guest, and your visit is over. You chose the money. You made my choice for me." He walked out the front door and didn't look back, leaving her shrieking his name in the house that was no longer his. He stood on the porch, the cool night air a balm on his scorched soul. The pain was immense, a gut-wrenching agony of loss and betrayal. But beneath it, for the first time in years, he felt the solid ground of his own character beneath his feet. He had made the sacrifice. He had chosen honor over comfort. And now, he had to make the second ride to Silver Creek. Not a ride of desperation, but a pilgrimage. A long, slow journey back to the only home he had left. The first rays of dawn were painting the eastern sky in bruised shades of purple and rose as Sterling's truck climbed the dirt track to the Aspen Run for the second time. The world was quiet, holding its breath. He drove with a funereal slowness, every rock and rut in the road a penance. His heart was a heavy, leaden thing in his chest, but it was a clean weight. The frantic, buzzing anxiety was gone, replaced by a vast, echoing emptiness and the single, flickering flame of a purpose. He was no longer a rancher, no longer a husband, no longer a man of property or standing. He was just a son, returning from a war he had waged against himself. He parked the truck where he had the night before and walked the final stretch. The house was just as he remembered, solid and peaceful in the growing light. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a silent invitation. This time, he didn't sneak. He didn't hide. He walked across the yard, his boots loud in the morning stillness, and stepped onto the wide front porch. She was there. Magnolia was sitting in a rocking chair, a steaming mug cradled in her hands, as if she had been waiting for him all night. She wore a simple dress, and her face, etched with the lines of age and worry, held a profound and weary stillness. She watched him approach, her eyes searching his, not for news, but for the truth of him. He stopped a few feet from her, stripping the hat from his head, his hands clenching and unclenching its dusty brim. All the words he had considered, all the speeches and explanations, evaporated in the face of her quiet, knowing gaze. There was nothing to explain. She already knew. She had designed the test. She would recognize the result. He sank to his knees on the rough wooden planks of the porch, the splinters pressing into his jeans. He bowed his head, unable to meet her eyes, the shame of physical force pressing him down. The hard-won pride that had defined his entire life had been burned away, leaving only the raw, humbled core of a man. "Mom," he whispered, the word a ragged, broken thing. It was the first time he had called her that in years. It had always been Mother, a formal, distant title for the matriarch. Mom was from a time before, a time of scraped knees and unconditional comfort. "I'm sorry." That was all he had. No excuses, no justifications. Just the simple, terrible truth of his own failure, offered up like a sacrifice. The rocking chair creaked as she leaned forward, setting her mug down on the railing. He heard her stand and walk toward him. He braced himself for a lecture, for an "I told you so," for the final righteous condemnation he so richly deserved. Instead, he felt her hand, warm and surprisingly strong, on the back of his neck. "I know, Sterling," she said, her voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I know you are." He looked up then, and he saw tears tracking through the faint wrinkles on her cheeks. They weren't tears of anger or triumph. They were tears of a deep maternal grief and an even deeper relief. He saw the mother who had held him, taught him, loved him, a mother he had cast aside for a hollow illusion. The dam inside him broke, and a wave of gut-wrenching sobs tore through him, the sound of a lifetime of pride shattering into a million pieces at his mother's feet. She didn't shush him or comfort him with platitudes. She just knelt there with him on the cold porch, her hand on his neck, a silent, steady anchor in the storm of his unraveling. Uncle Thomas appeared in the doorway, a quiet sentinel, his face grim but his eyes full of a grudging respect. He nodded once at Magnolia, then retreated back into the warmth of the house, leaving them to their reunion. When the storm passed, leaving Sterling spent and empty on the porch, Magnolia helped him to his feet. She led him to the other rocking chair and pushed a warm mug of coffee into his trembling hands. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the sun crest the mountains, bathing the valley in a clean, golden light. "She's gone," he said finally, his voice raw. "I know," Magnolia replied. "I told her to leave. I chose." "You chose yourself, Sterling," she said softly. "The best version of yourself. The man your father always hoped you would be." She looked out at the land, her land. Legacy isn't dirt and fences, son. It's character. It's wisdom. It's the strength to protect what matters, especially from the threats you invite in yourself. The land is just the reward for understanding that. The months that followed were a long, slow rebuilding, not of a ranch, but of a man. The foreclosure notice was rescinded, a simple matter for the woman who owned the bank's largest private account. But Sterling was not handed back the keys. His life on the Maddox Ranch, as he had known it, was over. His new life began in the small bunkhouse near his uncle's home in Silver Creek. He worked. For the first time in his life, he truly worked. Under the tutelage of Uncle Thomas, a man he came to respect with a fierce and quiet devotion, he learned the truth of the Maddox legacy. It wasn't in cattle ranching. It was in the granite heart of the mountains. He learned geology, learned how to read the rocks, how to manage the small, sustainable, and incredibly profitable silver mining operation that his mother had overseen remotely for 2 decades. His hands, once soft from signing papers, became calloused and scarred from tools and timber. He rose before the sun and fell into his bunk after dark, exhausted and sore, but with a sense of purpose that felt more real than any profit margin he had ever chased. He saw his mother every day. They rarely spoke of the past. They didn't need to. Their relationship was rebuilt, not with words of apology, but with shared cups of coffee on the porch at dawn, with quiet dinners, with the easy companionship of people working toward a common goal. He saw the immense strategic intelligence behind her gentle demeanor, the sharp mind that had built and protected a fortune while the world saw only a rancher's widow. One evening, months later, as autumn painted the aspens in strokes of brilliant gold, he was sitting with her on the porch. He was finally at peace. The hollow ache in his chest had been filled, not with pride, but with a quiet, sturdy humility. "You tested me," he said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. Magnolia looked at him, her eyes clear. "Tough love is a painful thing to give, Sterling. It was a terrible gamble. I could have lost you." "You did," he said honestly. "For a while. But you knew the man I was supposed to be, even when I didn't. You gambled on him." She reached over and placed her hand on his. It was a gesture of complete and final acceptance. "Welcome home, son." He looked out at the vast expanse of the mountains, the setting sun making the rock faces glow. He understood now. The ranch, the mine, the money, they were just things. The true inheritance, the real Maddox legacy, was the wisdom his mother had so painfully gifted him. It was the knowledge that home is not a place you own, but a truth you earn. And after a lifetime of foolish pride, after walking through the fire of his own making, Sterling Maddox had finally, truly, come home. The peace he felt was not given. It was built, one splinter, one scar, and one hard-earned lesson at a time.